Alright, so we've got the head on. It's had its first round of torque. So now that it's set for 24 hours, we're going to go ahead and double check our torque, just to see if there is any compression of the gasket. So we'll do our torque sequence, but we're just going to do it once at 27 foot-pounds just to double check everything. And I'm not getting a whole lot of movement, so that's good. After we've run the bike for about 100 miles, obviously we'll go back and double check it as part of that kind of running in service. But now you can see that the valves are nice and loose. What I'm going to do now is turn the motor over and make sure that this cylinder is actually on the right compression stroke. We are looking for top dead center compression. That way everything is nice and loose. So we see the intake just moved. Going back in. So we should be coming up on it. We'll just pop over and check our timing mark on the flywheel. And we're doing our adjustments at OT mark, centered in the window. If you're going to turn your motor over with the front of the crank, make sure that you don't have anything restricting compression, like your spark plugs. Make sure that they're out. If it doesn't move, chances are you have a bigger problem. So everything is still loose, but we have plenty of clearance left. So I'm just going to tighten these down just by hand, just to get them snug so there's no movement as I do other portions of this job. Sometimes if you're not careful, those push rods will fall out of their holders in the rockers, and then if you go to tighten things up, it obviously doesn't tighten correctly. So the next part is I'm going to check the rocker end float, so up and down movement. There's not really much of a spec for this that we go by. You don't want to hear any noise. There should be very little perceivable motion, but some people will refer to it as oil squish. You want it to move freely, but not really see a whole lot of movement. If there's a lot of movement, you'll hear clicking, so watch out for that. So this one, our intake has a little bit more movement than our exhaust. So one of the ways that we'll do it is, pretty quick and dirty. Just two big sockets and a little mallet smack. So that tightened up on it pretty good. There's still freedom of movement. This side is pretty darn good, not a whole lot of noise, so we're just going to leave that how it is. When we do our adjustments, our feeler gauges are 0.15 millimeters and 0.20 millimeters on our intake and exhaust. Obviously any feeler gauges work. These are nice just because they're individual. So get those snug enough to not fall out. Now some people, obviously there's, just like everything related to motorcycles, arguments about how tight is too tight, how loose is too loose. I tend to go with snug, but should be able to move it pretty easily. I found that the tighter I make it, the more kind of sound is created by the movement of the valves. However, I guess you could make the argument for the other way around too, that if they're super loose, they're going to be pretty loud as well. So I guess the moral of the story is try and make it as close to the middle ground as possible. Not too tight, not too loose. I like to be able to move the feeler gauge with not a ton of effort, but you'll know it. If your 15 starts to really like bend and flex and not want to move, that's probably too tight. You should be able to move it with just a little bit of hand motion. And then when you tighten up your locking nut, expect it to change slightly. whether that's because of the change of the tension on the threads, moving it back and forth, or you compensating and not realizing it by pushing against with the adjuster nut, pushing against the lock nut. So, you know, expect it to change a little bit. Like that changed and now it made it looser, but so now I know, okay, if I tighten it, it's going to make it looser. So maybe I'll go with a little bit tighter than what I think it should be when I go to tighten it down. So that's pretty darn snug. Okay. Okay, pretty happy with that. And then the big thing also when you're doing your exhaust is you want these to be as similar as possible. You don't want them to be super tight and one to be super loose or vice versa. They should be as pretty similar as you can make them. See how that worked out. That's pretty darn close to each other, so we'll call that good. Make sure everything's snug. Oops. So now at this point, what I like to do, pull your feeler gauges out, and I'll do one rotation of the motor to bring it back. Just see if anything changed, seat some things and move stuff around. So rotate it in a clockwise position or direction. You'll see the exhaust open up, which is what it should do. And there was overlap. So now our intake is open and intake is closed. And now we should be coming up on OT. I'm going to double check with my timing mark. OT in the window. So still not a ton of rocker play, but the rockers move. I'm going to check, see if these have changed at all. It's about the same. And that is pretty good. So I just rebuilt these rockers yesterday, so I put plenty of oil inside the bushings for them. Obviously, if it was a 69S, you would have needles and you would want to put oil or grease in those as well. Obviously, if you don't know when you're going to fire up your motor next, anything you can do to coat things so that there's no corrosion or things getting stuck, that's the best you can do. Some folks will even add oil to the chambers of the rockers. Not a bad idea. You know, there's really nothing against too much lubrication. So that's our basic check. We're going to go ahead and do the other side and get them both equal and then move on with the build. Thanks.